Today in the Public Square, is the U.S. election system broken? Boy, this is going to be a good conversation to come. Glad to have you with us today. The team consists of Dave Zanotti, Melanie Elsey, Rob Walgate, Alan C. Duncan, our producer, on Mike, and I'm Wayne Shepard. All right, this is going to be good, Dave.
You had screeching tires. Now the question is, how long will it be before the broken glass? It's like as soon as you announce that, it was like when you hear the tires screeching and you wait for the bang. All right, this is it. Here we go.
I have just so many questions, and I know we got an email that said "stay on point."
Yes. So is the election system
I'm
broken?
trying.
Let's do a little rabbit trail right from the start, and this will make things a little bit more complicated. Years ago, and I'm talking about the 1980s, we were not in favor of term limits. We looked at term limits. We read through it. We took a look. We studied the founders. We studied the framers. We were interested, but we weren't sold. We just weren't sold. It took a while to get there. And the question was honest. And as more intellectual capital came in and more people whom we thought highly of and scholars were looking at it, it became like a 50-50 thing. Do we need it? Should we do it? Should we not do it? How would we do it? Then we took a trip to Washington, D.C. This was an interesting trip. It had nothing to do with term limits, but we ended up doing a several-day visit underground in Washington, D.C. with people who were very highly connected in the United States Congress. And so for several days, we got to watch the way Congress really works. We got to ride on the trains. We got to walk with people whom everyone knew. And we walked with powerful people whose people didn't know and watched how they did their jobs. And we were being toured on the internal workings of how it all happened. When we left, we came back, took, I think, a one-day long shower. And the next day we had a meeting and said, it's got to be term limits. The corporate culture has grown so bad. This was with the House banking scandal, the House post office scandal. The internal corruption of the environment has gotten so bad that we absolutely must attempt to redress it. And the only way to redress it is to limit the amount of years you can go until the culture is corrected, because literally we send good people there and they turn into bad people. I mean, figuratively speaking, they become they go the wrong direction.
And I'm thinking of people that we know that have went there, and that went there with one intent and said, "Oh no, that'll never be me. That'll never happen. I'll never go there and do that." And then once they get there, it's like, I wish we could have told you were going to stay 25 years because you said you weren't.
Yeah,
they become professional legislators, don't they?
Well, Wayne, they become detached from reality. And we've seen this. We've known this at multiple state legislative areas. We've seen this in Tennessee. We've seen this in Florida. We've seen this in Ohio. We've seen it in other states, Pennsylvania, where it happens in the State House. It's kind of like at the State House is sort of like when a high school decides it wants to pretend that it's a college. And so they start spending boatloads of money and building all kinds of buildings, and their programs are and it's like they're a mini college. Well, the state legislatures are like that. They're like a mini Congress, and they use the same terms and they try to wear the same clothes, and some of them even have underground chambers that they travel through to get around to avoid the public, and you get to a place where you say, wait a second, this is in the air. When you begin to pay people better to be a lawmaker, a representative, than they would make in the private market, and you begin to put them in positions where they are given in that town or in the district where they're given a notoriety that no one else has, it's addictive. To be a part of that club, and then when you base their pensions on how many years they serve and stuff like that, it becomes a club.
A club, and some of them have taken up residency in Washington, D.C., and there are many instances where constituents feel that their representatives are out of touch with reality on what happens back at the home state.
Well, the conversion to saying it's time took a tremendous amount of research as well. I mean, we had to settle our own souls on this. And the reason that the resistance was there is because you just don't touch the Constitution lightly. You don't touch the systems of representation lightly. This is going to change things. If it happens, it's going to change things in a significant way for a lot of people, and that is a tremendous amount of responsibility. We took, just for one of the proposals that we worked on, we in the state that became law and the constitutional amendment, we took one entire year to work on 3 paragraphs of language. 1 year. 1 year in the drafting process and the review process. That's how long we took to be certain that we felt we had heard every possible objection or permutation or variation. And interesting today, that was 1992, the measure passed in 94, and it's still holding up very well today. So the work was worth it, but this is serious business. It can't be taken lightly. So now we're asking the question, is the U.S. election system broken? I feel the same kind of pressure to even enter into the conversation, because once you cross this threshold, you have to finish. And so let me liken it this way. I'm going to answer quickly. The election system is not broken. No. But it is being pulled apart at the seams. And we are now in the danger zone. It is being pulled apart at the seams. And over the next few minutes, we want to take a state-by-state look and a federal look and see where you can begin to see the stitches popping and the dangers. And here's the premise. When you pull the seams apart of the United States election system, these involve traditions that have been around for decades. I mean, these are lifetimes, generations. There are reasons. And now the technology has made the opportunity to try changing everything just because. When you start to pull the seams of an election process apart and you pull those traditions apart, you create gaps that can be exploited. Now, here's a worldview confession to all of the folks that listen to this broadcast. First off, we are so thankful that you do. It means that we're tremendously encouraged that people listen. We're tremendously encouraged when they respond. In so many ways, it's overwhelming, and we're very grateful. But we have to be completely transparent in this stuff. This stuff is scary, and you can mess it up. And that we're not interested in messing this up. So these are big pieces. So you pull the seams apart, and here's what happens. You make an opportunity available for bad actors when they see that space to find out if it's exploitable. Now, I know that's not popular. We'd like to believe that everybody has the best wishes in mind. But here's a confession about this organization. We have a worldview that has a full appreciation for the idea that we live in a fallen world. And there are bad actors. There are evil ideas. There actually is something called evil, and it is quantifiable and it is applicable. And we all stumble through the darkness. And there are people, and boy, I'm just looking right now across this room and across. We have all, Wayne, I think about things you and I have seen on the road in some of the radio events that we've done, the God Delusion debate, the Saddleback Forum on the presidency. There were always people around the edges, right? Trying to take advantage of this or capitalize on that or monetize the next thing, right? I mean, you remember the God Delusion debate?
Yes, very well.
The one that almost didn't happen?
Yeah, we worked very hard to make that happen, didn't we?
And there was a moment minutes before it was supposed to start where a backstage conversation had to happen among some lawyers because
you're not going to do what you want to do here, are you?
Yeah.
Wait a minute. We were invited to be here.
Yeah, and so it came down to the wire. All right, Rob, how many times have you and I been in debates? How many things, Melanie, how many things have we seen behind the scenes in the State House that you just walk out shaking your head, you weep? You weep. You watch somebody get bought and paid for.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Is it's always interesting to see what positions change based on who's writing the checks. I can remember the one debate I was involved into in the first gambling fight in the state of Ohio. I was debating a former congressman, and he made a great point, and he had me backed against the wall. And I feel like the Lord gave me a line, and I said, "What's interesting, Congressman, is if we'd have wrote you a bigger check than they wrote you, you'd be over here arguing with me. But the difference is they have a bigger checkbook than we do. That's why you have the position you have. And I was like, oh, after that, I was like,
I'm glad we're not doing video right now because my mouth is hanging open because I'm remembering that moment and I'm thinking to myself, oh my gosh, he said that out loud.
What did he say back to you when you said that?
Oh, no. He said he's doing it for all the right reasons and this. And so then I asked him, I said, does that mean you will forfeit the pay that they've been paying you as a consultant over the X number of months? Because, and he's not going to forfeit that. He laughed about it. And I said, I think that shows people do things for money when we stand on principle. So, and I feel like that was a Lord moment, a Holy Spirit moment. And I'm thankful for that.
So we've seen evil in this enterprise. We've seen it from the basement hallways underneath the Capitol building and what's going on. We've seen it from the basement trolleyways underneath the state houses. We've seen it in courtrooms. We have seen it.
Men are not
angels. It's there and it's real. So if you're going to pull the seams and create space in the electoral system, first thing that's going to happen is bad actors are going to come in. Why? Well, because that's what bad actors do, because there's real evil and there is real incentive to deconstruct the system, to manipulate it, because the money's really good.
Really good.
It's really good. So people who can beat the system can make a lot of dough. So when you start making these changes, you got to be really careful to think it all through. Right now, what we've got is vulnerability and exposure, Wayne. The seams are creating the space, and the space is going to blow up on us in 2024, and we got to talk about it.
We'll talk about the contributing factors to this pulling at the seams of the U.S. election system today on the Public Square. We're just getting started. If you have to leave us or leave and come back, we're online. Listen to the whole program online if you miss any part on radio, thepublicsquare.com.
Have you had a chance to listen to the Kids on the Square episode, The Sit-In? Join us for discoveries.
Did you hear about the college students in Greensboro?
No.
4 black college students, just like me, sat at Woolworth's diner.
Uh-huh.
And they didn't leave until they were served.
A behind-the-scenes look at a new book called The Front Steps.
And so I think that just kind of slamming those two emotions against each other in this book just makes it very interesting and powerful for me.
And laughs.
What do I do now? I guess I could go upstairs and read my library book again. Yeah, I'll go up a few and stare at the ceiling.
Kids on the Square aims to bless, encourage, and educate the next generation of American children by creating resources for families to connect and communicate in this digital era. So what are you waiting for? Grab a friend, share this episode with your family, and join us today at Kids on the Square.
Spreading the light of liberty across the land. Now back to the Public Square.
All right, let's get into the specifics today of this conversation about the U.S. election system. Is it broken or not? Rob, you have the first. Is this a provocative question, Rob?
No, it's not a provocative question. It may be more of a statement as well as a question. But I think when you look at, I've been voting since, when did I start voting? 1995 is when I started voting. And obviously, the biggest change in my lifetime for voting, I'd be interested in everyone else's, is the fact when I used to go vote, I was handed a piece of paper and I'd go into the voting booth. And that's no longer the case when I go vote. I go step in front of a tablet, basically.
Melanie, you remember paper ballots?
I do.
How did they work?
You had a hole punch.
Hole punch.
You had a little stylus type of a device, and you punched a hole in the card that was inserted, and then you physically took the card out and handed it to the person at the table.
I can also remember levers. I can also remember filling in the circles, more like a test in college, and then they would take the cards and they would scan the cards in that fashion, but different
Which
ways.
is what they do for absentee ballots now. You have to fill in the little circles and mail it in.
Right. And then they're counted through an electronic counting machine.
Yeah.
But not the same one that's going on in the online system. So when we talk about paper, there's two pieces to it. The first is the actual paper construct of what you vote on, and then how it's counted. And most people remember the old IBM machine card kind of things, where you had everything into a uniform sized card that was fed into a reader that would go very, very fast, but that could be checked 3, 4, 5 times for accuracy. And then you also always had a piece of paper that matched the card. So, I mean, you had something. The vote actually had a legitimacy. You could hold it in your hand. It wasn't transferred into simply a piece of electronic data. Now, the other thing is that these counting mechanisms and the algorithms and everything that was involved were not online. They were not on the internet. They were electrically done, and electrically is not even a word. They were done electronically.
They weren't in the cloud.
They weren't in the cloud, right? and then they were reported on paper and pencil, and then sent off however it was done. Paper ballots.
Yeah. I know Rob would accuse me of voting via the Pony Express, but actually, whatever happened to just a check mark in a box?
Yeah. Well, in Virginia, Governor Youngkin and the legislature there is trying to get back. They're trying to get back to a twofold system, one that's paper, check in a box, which can be electronically counted, but not online. In other words, you don't have to go into some corporation's algorithm and their studies and become accessible to hacking from any form of an outside online force. Now, obviously, every system has flaws, potential flaws, and seams. And clearly, if this one with paper was pretty good, though, because it was pretty hard to be able to tell what the cards said. And if you were really slick and you had memorized where the hole punches were, and you were someone that was in the counting process, and maybe you could make some disappear, but that's a pretty nefarious reality to think that someone would actually do that.
How many people, though, in their mind just went hanging Chad?
Yeah. And the hanging Chad thing in and of itself is pretty darn fraudulent.
Yes.
Because it was very easy to correct the next time around. You say, well, my goodness, there's 538 votes in the president, 537 votes. The presidency depended upon it. Yeah. It was also subject to serious manipulative review as well. Mm-hmm. If you really study what happened there. Look, that election was really close. If you had a perfect form of paper ballot or not, that election in Florida, they've all been around so long. And that would have been Bush-Gore, okay, or Gore-Bush, depending on how you see it. That race was really close. No matter what method you had there, that was going to go down to endless controversy. When you have a state as big as Florida, determine the whole game, you get 20 million people and it comes down to 538. It's almost impossible to believe.
You wonder how many thousands didn't show up and vote that day just because they got busy.
Yeah.
They ran an errand that took longer. They did this.
So the point is, paper's not perfect either. But at least with the paper, you know what you don't have? You don't have the fear that somebody hacked you and changed it. You don't have the algorithms being changed. Now, the other thing about this is no matter what system we have, it's going to be decentralized or centralized. And this is a part of the big fight. Part of the big fight is there are people who want voting to become completely centralized. They would like you to vote on your phone. They would like you to be able to vote on your phone and have it all go someplace, and it's instant count, instant tally, and it's all centralized, and it's sent into some centralized agency, and you'll get a receipt back on your phone that your vote was placed and your vote was counted. They would like to have it that centralized.
I think I would trust that the least.
Okay.
In terms of election security and the security of my vote.
I mean, look, if I was a kid, I'd try to get my dad's phone.
Well, it's even not just that, someone else using your phone. That's a good point. I hadn't even thought about that. I'm talking about the data being sent from phone to a central entity.
Sure.
And there's no paper trail. Where's the paper trail?
Okay, there's the seam that's pulled. How many hackers would just, for fun, say, oh, let's have some real fun with this?
Yeah, the manipulation aspect, because you think as well of how many people across the country, when they attempt to file their taxes every year, get a notification, well, someone's already filed the taxes for this social security number. And you're like, wait a minute. So that creates a process. Well, now when we're talking about an election standpoint, now we've got to figure that out in a 24-hour period. Hey, wait a minute here. Did someone really vote that wasn't them? How's this look? How's this work? Was it them?
So the example I give on centralization is the extreme one. All right, the one-touch button into a centralized position. That kind of helps the debate and the argument. So clearly, that is freaky. So the question is, how far back can you come to still have a better system that's more centralized? The other argument is, wait a second. The whole idea about voting is that if it's decentralized down to the precinct level, precincts are pretty small as far as the number of people, number of households. If you get down to that level, then anybody basically, if they're able to walk, can walk to the voting place if they have to, or certainly get transportation that's not going to be cumbersome to get there. So first off, they can get there. Secondly, they're in their home area where people could or should know them. So it kind of works against imposters. Thirdly, it's volunteers that are coming for the common good. Now, sure, they're probably mostly politically motivated in a lot of instances, but it's still an act of citizenship. They get a day pay rate that isn't worth the hassle that they have to put up with, to be sure. But the idea is that the more you decentralize something, the more difficult it is for someone to capitalize on it by overriding it easily with evil.
But the other part is not just casting of the vote. I think how you keep the seam tight and harder to pull apart is in the voter registration process. Who is on the roll to begin with that's able to walk in and cast a vote?
Now, we're going to get there in just a second because that comes into everything in regards to how you get into the portal. All right. All right.
Well, I think decentralization should be baked into the American mindset and the American system as a whole. You know, we're made up of states. You know, it's not just one big landmass with a centralized federal government. It's states create the nation. They created the federal government. You know, and you have local elections. And so I just think that the decentralization should be the American mindset. It's how we were started.
Well, and part of the problem is that the move toward centralization is mostly built on convenience. The idea we can do it faster, quicker, and easier for everybody, and let's just use technology to our advantage. I mean, after all, we could go to the moon. Can't we figure out, well, here's the deal. We can go to the moon, but we can't get our votes counted on one day. So we're not doing so good with that one.
Yeah. On one hand, I don't disagree about the paper ballot, but some people might think, well, in this day of computers and internet, shouldn't we be, modernizing our voting system? But then I think about how many times in the last year have I got notices from companies that my data has been breached by that company?
Yeah, Wayne, here's the big one. And this one flipped me out. People that are familiar with Social Security at any age or any level of participation with that program are now aware that Social Security had to outsource your ability to create an online account with them. It used to be done through Social Security. Now it's done through, it's YouGov.com. They had to farm it out. Why? They're afraid of being hacked. Mm-hmm. They know that they can't. People have no idea how the world of fraud and hacking is going on in the world of finance and the world of data transfer. It is relentless. It is 24 hours a day. It is every second of every minute.
And it's not just within our borders. It's not just within the U.S.
No, it's global. We're being attacked nonstop from everywhere. And records are being lost, records are being destroyed. So the idea of decentralization and less tech, which is kind of the harmony of paper ballots, is that, look, the seam is too wide now. We're vulnerable. Let's shut that seam back down and go back and make it tighter. And we can even make it tighter and keep it faster. That's the weird thing, is we think we can do it faster with paper than we can electronically.
Well, Dave, do you remember in the movie and the book, The Circle, the Tom Hanks, Emma Watson film? Mm-hmm. One of the big reveals in that movie, one of the big plot points was that all of a sudden you can vote with one button on your phone from your social media account. And this is kind of sort of a dystopian type of a book and film. And so you just have to wonder, maybe they were onto something there that we should be wary of this.
Well, that's factor number one in our discussion here today, but there's more to come, and you'll hear it as you stay with us now for the Public Square. Thank you for your support of this program, this listener-supported radio show, and thank you for listening online as well, thepublicsquare.com, or with the smartphone app, The Public Square.
Spreading the light of liberty across the land. Now back to the Public Square.
Is the U.S. election system broken? Our topic on the Public Square today. So far, we've talked about one factor, and that is our suggestion of going back to paper ballots. Dave?
There's another seam that's being pulled apart, Wayne, and this has to do with non-citizens voting.
Oh.
Now, this is the one that everyone has tried to look away from and resist because we just don't want to believe it. It's just like, no, that's not going to happen. There's too many systems. I mean, come on, we got the Secretary of State, we got the local boards of elections, we got the folks sitting there on precinct workers and poll workers checking signatures, and we've even amped it up with a lot of places now. You have to have show an ID. Okay, we know that's potential, but it's not real. So let's not overreact there, because that could be something that could be utilized for partisan advantages all around. And so it's, okay, let's just watch it. Well, now we got a problem. Okay, now we got a problem. It goes back, Melanie, what you were talking about with voter registration.
Mm-hmm.
All right, the problem is we've got a hole in the bucket. We've got seams popping apart. For years, you've been talking about motor voter laws.
Well, motor voter laws, and in combination with that, the Help America Vote Act.
Which are both federal proposals that require agencies to give, at the end of the day, they require agencies to give a voter registration form to people who are connecting with the government, but who may not be citizens.
And the piece of the HAVA Act was that you can show who you are through producing a hard copy of an electric bill, a utility bill, things that don't have anything to do with citizenship. It's just residence.
Right.
A bank account. If you had a bank account, you can show that to confirm that you are Susie Smith or who you say you are.
Mm-hmm.
That's a problem, because non-citizens can have bank accounts and they can have electric bills.
I talked to some folks over the weekend. They're in the process of moving. They moved out of their home this past weekend. They have to live in a temporary home with someone's parents for 8 weeks, and they get into their home October 20th. So we got a voting situation because all three homes are in 3 different counties. So they have a voting situation on where they're going to vote because they have to be 30 days in one. I mean, it's created a mess. Now, there's a way that they could do it simple, but they technically would be breaking the law if they did it that way. They don't want to break the law. And they're like, this is set up in a way where it's really easy to exploit the law and break the law, and no one would ever check. But we don't want to do that. And I said, I know you don't. So that showed a seam in this process that can happen here.
Sure. And it's unusual for that to happen.
Yes.
And so you try to govern toward the norm, not toward the exception.
Yep.
And so it does take responsible citizenship and extra work to go through that process. Same thing happens here. When someone decides that they want to, they're in this country legally now. They're not a citizen, but they're legal, but they can't vote. But they can do other things. They can get driver's licenses. They can do other things. Well, according to federal law, if you go into a DMV and you get a driver's license, you are required by federal law to be handed a federal form on how you can register to vote. You're given a voter registration form. Now, you can't use it. You're not legal. But they're handing it to you.
And that form does not require proof of citizenship.
Right. Well, because actually you got the driver's license. Now you've proven your identity,
right,
but not your citizenship. So the question becomes, you're literally handing people who can't vote voter registration forms. Now, How can good come out of that? Anybody can be confused. And that doesn't make them anything other than normal. Like all the rest of us, somebody can be confused. So the question is there a bleed into the system now of people who are either applying for benefits or driver's licenses? Are we beginning to see non-citizen names appearing on voter rolls?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Hang on. That was a yes and an absolutely. Stop the presses. This is the kind of thing that we were talking about, the term limits thing earlier, where you come to the place where the evidence overwhelms the discussion. The answer to the question is yes, we are. Examples, please.
Well, there's a lawsuit that's pending in Wisconsin right now. It's filed roughly a week ago, and they've found tens of thousands of non-citizens on voter rolls.
Wait a minute. Tens of thousands could mean like 20,000, 30,000. Really?
Yes. And there's an organization.
That's the biggest number I've heard.
There's an organization that filed the lawsuit against the Wisconsin Election Commission and the DMV for failing to check if voter registrants are U.S. citizens. They believe that they have found 72,000 permanent non-residents who have identical driver's licenses as compared to U.S. citizens. So that's the thing. There's nothing to differentiate that those people aren't U.S. citizens, so then they can register to vote, and there's no way to check it.
And they're on the rolls.
They have a number of people that are on the rolls, and they expect it to grow. But they found 72,000 that have these ID cards that driver's licenses that look just like U.S. citizens' driver's licenses. There's no way to tell that they're not.
So that we don't have 72,000 names on the voting rolls. We have 72,000 people with the cards with the potential.
Correct.
Okay.
And we have some that are already on the rolls. Yes.
Okay.
What state did you say this is coming from?
Wisconsin. This is coming from Wisconsin.
Yeah, and that's a pretty important state.
A
in this
battleground
process,
state
right?
could turn on 5,000 votes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's pretty significant.
All right, Melanie, got examples.
So in Arizona, there's a legal organization and has sent letters to all 15 counties of their county recorders requiring them to ensure that non-citizens will be unable to vote. And in their letter, they are quoting statistics that basically show that through the National Voter Registration Act and the fact that act forbids states to demand that an applicant submit information on their citizenship, it allows the states to basically go in and deny voter registration regardless of whether you have filled out this federal form. So they're in the investigatory stage. Ohio has already pulled names off of their voter registration forms. In the article that was covering Ohio, there were complaints by recently naturalized citizens who got the letter saying you could be in violation of state and federal law and we will pursue you. Well, and they're like, well, wait a minute, I'm naturalized, I'm allowed to vote. And they were upset about it. I'm thankful that a few people got a letter in error, but the Secretary of State has identified, I think it's less than 1,000 people that were on the rolls in Ohio.
Now, Alabama, this is one that flipped me out. Alabama, Dunk, can you believe that? You got family.
Yeah, I got a lot of family.
Family ties, Alabama. 3,251. That's the number of names, 3,251 people who are non-citizens on the voter registration rolls with the state. Now, you say, okay, Alabama, and that's not a swing state. I mean, 3251. I get it.
Hang on, though. You're not just affecting the larger races. That number could affect a down ballot race.
It could affect a state rep. It could affect a county mayor. It could affect all kinds of races. All right. So now we're not suggesting that the numbers are astronomical. What we're suggesting is, look at this, the pattern. The pattern is how many states now. It's not just swing states. It's not just red states. It's not just blue states. It's coming across now in lots of places.
But if you see a seam being ripped apart, wouldn't you want to fix the seam? That's the point of it, to show where things are being ripped apart. So, hey, let's tighten this up. Let's make sure this can't happen. And I think that's the example that Wisconsin's given with the 72,000 identical driver's license saying, wait a minute, this could be exploited exponentially.
Yes. So you see the seams are coming apart. And so this is a significant point of problem. Now, Immigration is not going to go away. The question of immigration, the question of these interchanges on identity and on benefits and handing people, the federal law demands if they come in for a voter's law, anyone who comes in for a driver's license has to be given. Have you stood in line and it has them say, "Are you registered to vote? Would you like to be?" All right, you still got to give them the form. Okay, you have to go through the process. And so there's going to be people falling through the cracks in that regard, and we need to be fully aware. One more example, another seam popping.
We're coming back to it on the Public Square in a moment. You stay with us. Let's jump back into the conversation today on the Public Square. Who would have thunk that Nebraska would come into play here, Dave?
Oh, Nebraska is the hot subject right now. We've been looking at it. And this is kind of fun, Wayne, because we have been working with 270 to Win, the website, for a long time. I mean, I think ever since that site popped up and became interactive, we've jumped on it. We've used it on lots of election night coverages with iVoters. And anyone can go to 270 to Win. We have no financial interest in it. We do not endorse anything about the politics of the people. They just created an interactive map that works relatively well. I was somewhere, we had three people doing it at the same time the other night, and they all kept coming up with three different numbers. So I'm not saying that it's an absolute bulletproof site, but by and large, it's pretty good.
If you fall into a trap on social media and can get lost for hours, you can do the same at 270 to Win.
Yeah,
by playing with the map, by playing with Senate races, by playing with House races. Yeah.
Oh, I see how you spend your time now, Rob.
Yeah. On how
270 to Win.
How the polling works and what's the best insight. So it gives you some kind of idea what might happen. So we came up with a map last week that seemed pretty accurate to the data that's available right now, and it showed 270 to 68. 270 is the number you got to have to win. 270 for Harris and 268 for Trump. That's what we showed. Interestingly enough, the next night, Brett Baer was on his program on Fox using the exact same count on the map, saying the same thing, which led him to the conclusion of, wait a second, what if one vote changed? Well, you say, well, it's by state. You can't change one vote. Wait a minute.
Mm-hmm.
For the last number of years, two states have been pulling at the seams of the idea of the Electoral College. And in so pulling those seams, they've created a workaround where in Nebraska and in Maine, you have something that is extra constitutional to the federal system. You don't have the winner-take-all states. You have an electoral college setup where the state legislature has decided if you win the state, you get X number of our votes, but then you have to win this congressional district to get their vote and that congressional district to get their vote. For a total of, there's three of them, right?
Well, in Nebraska.
One in Nebraska.
Yeah, in Maine.
And two in Maine.
Well, hang on.
In Nebraska, it's called the blue dot.
Yeah.
And the listeners need to understand that the electoral votes are calculated based on the combination of Senate seats and House seats for that state. So most states will do, and Article 2 of the Constitution authorizes the state legislatures to determine how those electors are selected. So you have Maine and Nebraska. There's two Senate seats have to be winner-take-all because those are statewide seats. So in Maine, you have two extra congressional seats. So those could be split between one candidate or the other. You have to earn each congressional district. And in Nebraska, total of 5, you have 2 Senate seats and you have 3 congressional seats. So you have the possibility of 3 seats in Nebraska yielding the 5 electoral votes.
Now, that causes people to say, well, see, that whole system is too complicated. We should get rid of it. Well, the system is complicated. It has layers. But when everybody does it the same way, you have an understood practice and a tradition. When someone pulls the seams and says, oh, I've got an idea, let's take that little tiny window of constitutional authority that's been given to the states to decide the electors. I mean, that's a big deal. It's not a huge door, it's a window. And let's kind of jump through that window and change the way we're going to assign our electors. Now you've got another system. You've expanded the process. You've torn at the seams. You've created a space. So what you come down to is Brett Baer on Fox News talking about the blue dot. If this map is 270 to 268, if Donald Trump wins that one congressional seat that wins the presidential election in that one congressional district, he moves the whole college to a tie.
Yes, right there. And where is it? Around Omaha, Nebraska.
Yeah, the reason it's called a blue dot is because it's Warren Buffett's blue dot. That's the community that he lives in. Warren Buffett of Berkshire Hathaway, and Warren Buffett of one of the largest in all of human history, one of the largest contributors to the pro-abortion movement in the history of the world is the Warren Buffett and the Buffett Foundation, named after his late first wife. And we're talking about billions of dollars dedicated to the abortion industry. So there's a big blue pro-abortion, pro-Warren Buffett, pro-progressive left dot sitting in Nebraska, a state that always votes red, but they carved out the one district. Now, I don't know why they chose that district. I don't know. I'm wildly speculating, but I'm guessing that everyone listening right now goes, duh. Who lives there? Who's got control? Who's the biggest money person in Nebraska? Just so happens that's Warren Buffett's district. I guess it's a coincidence.
We hear all the arguments regarding gerrymandering across the country. Can you imagine how they'd be amplified if every state operated the way Maine and Nebraska did?
Wow.
If every state was one vote in the election, I mean, you would.
Pennsylvania was considering it a few years ago.
I know. And you want to talk about divisiveness? Maybe we should do this because then state governments would get nothing done at the state house except for arguing about gerrymandering. Maybe this.
So you see, when you pull the threads, you create. An action creates a reaction. When you pull that thread, you create a seam, and the seam can move to a power broker situation. Where now you could actually say, if this map were to hold true, and Donald Trump were to win that blue dot, that throws the whole election into a tie, which throws it to the Congress. Or let's say that this map is true and it's impossible for the Trump campaign to win that. You could make the case that Warren Buffett was the reason, the singular reason, at the end of the day, because it came down to one vote. And there's only two places, either Maine or Nebraska, where the one vote can actually change. I think the projection is that up in Maine that Trump would get those votes.
He would get one.
He would get one
in Maine as well.
So but see, the idea was it wasn't supposed to come down to congressional districts. Okay, it was supposed to be the states electing the president. The states said, "Let's get cute and let's pull the seams a little, see what happens." Well, what can happen is you can end up in a power broker game. It may not come to this, but it's structurally. It could. So that's, again, we're pulling the seams of the election system. All right, there's one more pull on the thread we got to talk about. Oh, by the way, and so the answer to that one is, here's a good idea. Maybe the Electoral College makes more sense than we think. Maybe paper ballots make more sense than we think. Maybe finding a way to make sure that non-citizens are not falling into our voter registration rolls, that would be a good idea. But wait, there's more. Last one. You ready?
Yep.
Counting the ballots.
That might be the most important part of the whole process.
What a novel idea.
Isn't that interesting? And
We've been there and done that, though.
And reporting them promptly. Here's a story that's out there right now. We just have time to get into it. We'll set it up before the break. The story that's out there right now is this. Remember we covered the story both here and on 1850. We covered the Newman story, the post office. What happens if the post office slow walks the ballots?
We covered this on 1850. And what's frustrating, you hear my frustration in my voice. What's frustrating to me is this is something that could have been fixed by state legislatures in years previous, so we wouldn't be facing this.
Okay, but even if Newman comes through and delivers the mail on time, Pennsylvania is sending out, yes, Pennsylvania, that one state. There are just 5 states right now that anyone's talking about going to be the ultimate deciding factor in this election. Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. That's the game, the way everybody sees it. Everybody sees the map the same way. Pennsylvania being the biggest and without a doubt the most important. Whoever wins Pennsylvania, big deal. It's a very big deal. If Harris wins Pennsylvania, Trump's got issues. All right, he's got to run the table somewhere else. If Trump wins Pennsylvania, according to the maps, it's over. He can't lose. So here's the challenge. That's the way the maps are set up right now. What if Pennsylvania is already telling us we're not going to know the outcome of our vote count? I don't know, days, maybe
chaos.
a week, maybe longer. The one state hanging out there is already telling us we're not going to be able to know for days.
All right, there's more to talk about this situation in Pennsylvania, and we'll get to it in our final segment in a moment. If your station will not be with us for that final segment, you can listen online at thepublicsquare.com. And have you used the smartphone app? Very easy to download and use free of charge to listen to any of our programming. Thepublicsquare.com.
We will be right back for more on The Public Square.
We're talking about the U.S. election process, and Pennsylvania has entered into the discussion here in the last few minutes. Alan, you wanted to jump in here.
Yeah, we always pass around some articles to look at when we're preparing for these shows. And so, Dave, you sent us a Washington Post article about this. Pennsylvania presidential election results could again take days to count is the headline. Then you know how they have underneath it, a little kind of a summary almost of what the article is about. So sometimes that's all I read. Sometimes if you're just skipping around, sometimes you just check in. Just, kind of what's it about? You should never do that. I should never do that. Okay, because here's what it says just under the headline. Republicans in the state Senate refused to change the law and allow mail-in votes to be counted ahead of Election Day, despite widespread calls for change. So you read that, and you think, oh, come on, Republicans. Why are you blocking a common sense good idea? Wouldn't this have been a nice time for some bipartisan cooperation just to get a common sense idea done? So you're reading the article and you're thinking that, at least I was. But if you keep reading the article, which again, I would advise you to read the whole article because they're tricky sometimes. It goes on and says, the consensus the panel wrote in June 2021 is that the advanced mail-in ballot processing could resolve many of the problems that contributed to concerns about the validity of votes in Pennsylvania. That year, 2021, state lawmakers passed a bipartisan bill that made significant changes to Pennsylvania election law, including allowing county officials to begin processing mail-in ballots 5 days before Election Day. But it contained other Republican-based priorities, including tighter rules for voter identification, something we've been talking about today, and limits to ballot drop boxes. Then Governor Tom Wolf, D, vetoed the legislation, saying it would create barriers to voting. So they did it. They had it passed. And so the top of the article says Republicans did this. The Democratic governor vetoed the law they did pass.
Exactly. And therein is the rub. And here now becomes the problem. What Pennsylvania is saying is, because we expect at least 50% or more of our vote to come in mail-in, which is much more than absentee ballots. That's early balloting. It's all the different methodologies that they've got out there. We are not permitted to start opening those envelopes. Forget counting them. You have to open them. You have to open millions of envelopes and get the material out. That's the first thing. And there's a chain of custody in these processes. You have to have that systematized. You can't mess these things up. So you got to open the thing. It's got to be opened correctly so that it's not damaged. And now you have to start the counting. And they're saying, since that's the problem we have, we'll get to it when we get to it, and all the nation will wait.
Wow. Days, maybe weeks, huh?
The whole nation waits. Every conspiratorialist is going nuts, and the clickbait revenue across the country is soaring.
Well, I think just to add context to that, and the article states that in 2020, this process of opening early is called pre-canvassing. So in 2020, 27 states allowed pre-canvassing. Since 2020, 16 more states have passed laws permitting it. So that means 43 states out of 50 allow the pre-canvassing. So Pennsylvania is one that does not.
And it's one of the larger states. So that's going to create a hindrance.
All right, not good. To be pulling the seams, what's happening? All right, see the bad players kind of coming in and just, or somebody gets mad, somebody said this, next thing you know, you're pulling the seams, now you got a problem. So here's what this goes back to. We have had a concept for decades, for generations in this country, that election day should be a day.
Mm-hmm.
Mail-in ballots, the way we're doing them now, makes elections, now they take months. You vote in October, you vote in November. Some places you now vote in Pennsylvania, they're starting to vote in September. So they've got the earliest voting, the latest counting. How can that be smart?
And I understand not allowing the results of pre-canvassing. I understand making sure that it stays secret what the tallies are before election
day.
But
if you didn't have this monster mail-in problem, you wouldn't have to worry about somebody spilling the beans on pre-canvassing.
That's right. You still have to fix the problem. And the problem is we can't, they're saying, I mean, when they're telling you 3 months in advance, hey, we may not be able to get, it's like me in high school telling the teacher the week before the project's due, hey, I'm
not looking so good here.
Yeah, it's not,
I can't do another one of those baking soda volcanoes.
I've got some sick grandparents running around and we don't know what's going to happen.
My dog's really hungry.
Yeah. So I feel like that's what it's like.
So we've got a situation where we are being told we do have a problem. And the problem, they're saying we can't fix it. We'll get to it when we get to it. So how does that happen? Number one, we used to vote on a day. Well, that's like, there's going to be exceptions in a country this large. Come on, you got to make some room for people that can't, that's got to work. They've got a medical situation. They're going to be out of the country. They got problems. Okay, so let's have absentee ballot voting with cause. In other words, you have to write in and say, please send me the ballot. Here's why. Here's who I am, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to take some time, some effort to get an absentee ballot. We didn't used to have early voting. We didn't have to have drop boxes. We didn't have voting starting in September and October and then going into November. We didn't do any of that stuff. You showed up on the day. You went to your hometown precinct. You said, hi, y'all, remember me? All right, and they do. All right, and you signed the name the way you signed it the last time you were there. And on that day, you take the simplest possible form, which is a piece of paper that can be electronically counted really, really fast, and everybody knows by midnight what happened. And it worked. And it worked for decades, and it worked for generations. And the seams were tight because the system was simple. Is it insulting to our technological egos? Is it insulting to all the companies that want to make money off of these transactions? Because every vote's a transaction. Think about it. All right, the voting, it started with the voting machine companies. Now you've got all the other players that are in. They want a piece of the action. All right, and the politicians can dole that out. This has become an industry. You pulled the seams, and now you're basically in a position where, because you've pulled so many seams, we don't have voter ID. We don't know who you are. It's coming in by mail. We can't get them counted on time. And if Newman decides to slow walk the mail, then we're going to have litigation out the yin-yang because we've got ballots that are coming in past the date. The election system is broke. And you killed it with 1,000 paper cuts. You just pulled the seams, and now stuff's falling out all over the place. All you need is the perfect storm for everybody to go, holy smokes. And if you thought that the last one was the perfect storm, now they're previewing it. I'm guessing Vegas is setting odds on when Pennsylvania's going to get their count done. That's the only thing that's left is let's gamble on how long it'll take Pennsylvania to count.
What do we do?
What do we do? I don't know. I'm too busy having a heart attack over here. Why not? You have an answer as well.
I am glad that we're talking about this and that people aren't going to be, hopefully they're listening and they're not going to be surprised when this happens.
Yeah.
So that's at least one good thing. Expose this, that this is going on.
What do? We got to repent. What do I mean by that? We got to change our minds. That's what repentance means. We got to realize that we have pulled so many strings for whatever reasons that are out there. And there's all kinds of reasons. Some of them are quite benevolent. Some of them were mistaken. We've got to go back to the simplest, most secure way to quickly do this process on the same day. Well, wait a second. That's terribly inconvenient. Yes, it is. And if you want to keep the bad guys out, whoever they are.
It's worth the inconvenience.
Thank you. You have to step up and say, I'm a citizen. If that's my worst situation, I've got to be inconvenienced to one day a year. Okay, we'll give you the absentee thing so, we're not being discriminatory. We got that part. After that, show up. You care enough to vote? Show up and do it right. Keep the bad guys out.
I think we could take the executive order that was signed by Governor Youngkin and use it as a template for statutes on the paper ballot side of the question.
Well, Dave's given us our marching orders on what to do. Let's include prayer in that as well. And thanks for listening to The Public Square. Very helpful discussion today. If you found it helpful, pass it on. Use the publicsquare.com website. Thanks for listening.
The Public Square is a broadcast service of the American Policy Roundtable.